Welcome back to Bitcoin Season 2, Writers Room, Bitcoin Season 2 by Blockspace Media. I am Charlie.
I am Colin. And we're going to be talking about
Bitcoin soft forks. I mean, this kind of applies for any soft fork in general, because guess what? You've been lied to. These other blockchains, I use this term loosely, these other blockchains all have governance boards, foundations, and all this stuff. And they use these smoke and mirrors to think that, like, you got to go appeal to certain people. Well, Bitcoin is a little bit different. At the same time, it's also kind of the same, because the Bitcoin people sometimes think, well, isn't there like a process that you got to go to? And the answer is always maybe, but
Charlie.
not really.
Here's the deal. You've been gaslit by the blockchain globalists. They want you to believe there's only one way to do it. There's not.
Exactly. Now I'm going to buy your supplements, Mr. Schmalix Jones. No. Anyway, no, we have an interesting episode. Colin and I are going to riff on this whole like soft fork thing, because it's particularly relevant. We have a conference related to trying to convince this anarchic system that is Bitcoin about the possibility of a soft fork. Before that, we got to have a word from our sponsor. Bitcoin Season 2 is brought to you by Botanix. Botanix Labs is pioneering a new direction for DeFi with the first EVM L2 running on Bitcoin that's built to be forward secure, decentralized, and share gas fees generated by the network with users. See the future of DeFi at Botanix, botanixlabs.xyz. Okay, so now that we got the hooks in, Colin, you actually prepared. I know like there's all these like reasonable explanations of how soft forks work, but you actually have a video. This has been, the software process has been documented before.
I think that this is to date the most accurate representation of how Bitcoin upgrades work in real time. So we're gonna take a quick
look. Let's roll this tape here.
Sirs, another insurance company is going under. Now determining most prudent move for insurance company. Bailout. The most prudent move is a bailout. Bail out the insurance company.
Yeah. So
How can I help?
for the listeners, this was a scene from South Park where they basically cut the head off a chicken and let it run around on like one of those,
on like a trivia show board, or like a a round table with all of these different decisions on it, and it's basically a mock of like a Fed, a Fed market conference, or Fed Open Market Committee meeting, where they're trying to decide how to respond to a financial crisis. So shout out to the great Trey Parker and Matt Stone. I used to think that South Park was a little too sophomoric, but every now and then you just get these sparkles of brilliance in their writing that really just blow open how absurd a lot of our current society is. But yeah, I think that the reason I wanted to show that was because, kind of like you were saying at the beginning of the show, a lot of people have this image of Bitcoin governance in mind, that it's this kind of well-structured, well thought out, linear process. And it is really anything but. It's a lot of shouting into the void and autistic screeching from all of these different mediums, whether that be social media, Bitcoin Talk, or IRC, Internet Relay Chat, where a lot of the developers and key stakeholders, or economic participants, I should say, hang out, because it's not just developers. But there's so much that goes into consensus. There are so many different, variables that have to be juggled, a lot of different stakeholders, a lot of different arguments that are being juggled at once. And there's never really any clear path forward. And I really think, and we'll get to this later, maybe when we look at the OpNext programming, nothing is indicative of this more, in my opinion, than the path that we've gone for covenants, from CTV being proposed and kicked around in 2022 to now OpCat being the kind of leading proposal based on loose consensus for the next soft fork. So
yeah, and the thing is, like, if we like, there have been times in Bitcoin's history where there have been like pretty clear like thought leaders and a few people who do like kind of like lead the the spiritual and the economic and the developer ethos of Bitcoin. But I would say right now, and it has been in the past, but especially is clear right now that there is like a lot of the building blocks of how consensus has worked in the past are now being revisited. And in fact, like at our conference Op next week, we will even discuss. We'll have a panel discussing some of these, specifically BIPs 8 and 9. But before that, I want to just like lay some foundation, which is what is a soft fork and what is a hard fork. So at a technical level, the one-liners are a hard fork, quote, expands the rules on what makes a valid transaction, and a soft fork restricts the rules on what makes a valid transaction. A hard fork is not compatible with the other forked chain, whereas a soft fork is historically compatible with nodes who have not upgraded.
And just you often hear the term backwards compatible or backwards incompatible. A hard fork is backwards incompatible. Old rule sets will not conform to it. So when you are executing a hard fork, it is a completely new history for the chain versus a soft fork, which is backwards compatible. And even if you don't update to the client, your node will still be in sync with the longest chain after that fork is activated.
Yeah, and the thing is, like, I think it's easy to understand what a soft fork is in a one line, but even I, now many years into my Bitcoin journey, feel like I'm still discovering obscure things about this. I'm going to highlight a comment from a viewer, Rindell, who says, quote, what if we already have opcat? And I actually probably won't try to get into this, but I would recommend you go and listen to my most recent episode interview with Post Capone, the most recent Bitcoin Season 2 interview. So basically, if let's pretend you're a node, it is live, Rindell. Let's pretend you're a node network, and let's pretend you are a node, and there's like new versions of like the Bitcoin Core client or just whatever Bitcoin Bitcoin client you're running, and they're updated, but you just don't do anything because you're like, I'm just going to set it and forget it. Your node can probably run like that for forever, and new versions of these clients can get updated. And let's say there's a soft fork and your node doesn't update to the soft fork. Let's say you don't even know about this soft fork. Bitcoin will still work for you. You may notice that under certain weird conditions, like you have trouble getting a transaction in a block, but like Bitcoin will functionally work very similarly for you, probably. But all the new people with soft fork will be like, we have a more narrowly defined rule set. We have restricted the rules on our transactions. So basically, we can take an existing, say, opcode, which currently doesn't do anything in Bitcoin, and we can say this opcode is going to be opcat. And so if we soft fork, all the new nodes and the miners start treating that opcode as if it's opcat. So all the old nodes will be like, okay, if they're not even using that, they're sending Bitcoin back and forth just fine. The new nodes will be like, we're going to recognize this logic of opcat. This is a pretty hand-wavy explanation, but I think it's important because the idea of what a soft fork is continues to, I believe, bewilder a lot of people. So how does a soft fork happen? Well, there's not a defined process. At a technical level, miners will start producing blocks which enforce certain soft fork mechanisms and logic, and then the nodes will then validate those blocks. Whether the nodes knowingly validate these actual rules, which are the soft fork, can be a little bit fuzzy. But the important thing is that the nodes will validate these blocks. Maybe the miner is enforcing a soft fork, which gets into the Rindell comment of, oh my God, is this live? What if we already have opcat? So that's a bit of a rambling explanation. Colin, I'm going to toss it to you to talk about whatever the next, logical train.
Yeah, I think just going back to like some of the things that you were talking about with regards to enforcing the new rule set. Let's take SegWit as just a quick example. So SegWit was effectively, I know this is still controversial, it was effectively a block size increase. Like, people don't like to hear that sometimes, but now, the virtual size or weight, as it's now called. It's all this mental gymnastics to basically justify these changes of a Bitcoin block is 4 megabytes instead of 2 megabytes. Now, one of the ways that was accomplished is you basically take the signature, which segregated witness stands for segregated witness of the signature of a transaction. You take the signature for a Bitcoin transaction and you put it in the witness field of the block. Now, that witness field is not actually that signature in the witness field is not actually present in older versions of Bitcoin pre-SegWit. It's pruned from those nodes. So that data is not stored, but it's done in a clever way to where those transactions can still be validated by those older nodes. So without the SegWit update on your Bitcoin node, you do not have that data, but it still exists on SegWit nodes, but it doesn't exist on older nodes, but it's in such a way to where you can still validate those transactions and prove, the deterministic link for who sent them. So that's kind of an example of the ways in which you can still be in sync with newer updates without having the actual upgrade itself. So I might have butchered that. I'm sure that there's
Again,
someone
like,
out there who's
the
more
thing is, like,
technically sound than me, who's
yeah,
like,
but
that's not really how it works, but that's kind of just the basic kind of high level.
yeah, but the thing is, like, you gotta hear this explained a few times, I think, because like,
Yeah.
when you first get into Bitcoin, you're like, "Oh, software, that's easy. I know what that is." But then you learn about it more, and you learn about how Bitcoin technically works, you're like, I
Yeah, it's like, how do the rules carry over? How are you still making sure that your older nodes are, you know, like basically working under the same framework if the rules are changed?
yeah.
And
So, step 1, you have to get the miners to start including, rules in their blocks, which enforce a soft fork. Step 2, the nodes have to then confirm those blocks as part of the
yeah.
chain.
So, and this is again gets into kind of, I will say that the funny thing about soft forks and just upgrades in general and the politics behind them is people still don't agree on who obviously controls how a fork is activated. So the basic idea is any fork that has node adoption from economic nodes, i.e., nodes actually participating. When we say economic nodes, we mean nodes where users are using their own node to send their own transactions and are actually participating in, mempool relays and things like
Well,
that.
they're
Not
like
just
doing economics
they're
on Bitcoin.
actually using the node for real network activity rather than just saying I'm running a node, but they're not actually gossiping with any other nodes and they're not really
Yeah,
that
well, it
connected to the
represents like
network.
this blurry thing called like
Yeah.
economically active nodes.
So
So
just to quickly put a pin in what I was saying and highlight that note, everything we're talking about right now has been raked over multiple times over, like ad nauseum, in a bunch of different forums. And everyone kind of it's all kind of boils down to semantics and some degree of subjectivity into how all of
exactly.
these things work. But you can push forward a soft fork with so a HODL node doesn't get
Oh
included
yeah,
in
we
economic nodes. I mean, so what I'm basically saying is it's like, let's say that you're running a node, but you're not actually using it to send your own transactions. You're not actually using it to gossip with other nodes in the network. You're not participating as much as other nodes in terms of your ability to, sync with, or not sync with, but to interact with the rest of the network. You're not providing as much if you just have your node sitting there and you're not actually using it for its purpose,
but
which
you
is a
say that
server
call, but you say like,
broadcast.
let me take the opposite oh my god, we're already in the weeds. I would
Yeah, this
I would say it does. This is why I use this is why I have this like kind of blurry hand wavy thing of like economically active nodes. You don't even have to be transacting. It's just like you whatever like you use Bitcoin for represents some kind of economic weight and stakeholdership.
yeah,
And
and
like, yeah,
yeah,
whether
and also I
you
guess
yeah.
like you might just use the term active versus economic here. Basically, the idea is like if enough of the nodes that are actually active in the network being actively used upgrade to a soft fork, you could have what's called a user activated soft fork where the majority of nodes adopt a proposal and push it through basically by sheer democratic will, right? This is opposed to a miner activated soft fork where the miners take charge and push something forward. And this tension was at the core of the set of SegWit's activation, and also SegWit2x, which we're not going to get into that here too much because it's really.
We're not going to get into it at all. Actually, I'm gonna nix that one.
But if you, Charlie's a secret B cacher. But if you go back, there's been a lot written about this. I recommend Aaron Van Weerdem's series in Bitcoin Magazine from back in the day. He did really good coverage of SegWit2x and the No 2x movement, which SegWit2x was basically a larger block size increase that was being pushed by a coterie of miners, or a cabal, you might call them, of miners and exchange operators and other, kind of bigwigs in the Bitcoin ecosystem at the time. But it didn't end up getting adopted because there was not enough economic support. Or there was not enough node support for it, not enough user support.
Okay, let's bring this back down. The answer is
reel it in.
The people who use Bitcoin, however you define that, have a major role to play. Have
a major role to play. And I guess to kind of just really succinctly try to describe the best case scenario for activation is you want the node operators, the economic nodes, the active node operators, and the miners to be on the same page. It's better.
Ideally, everybody's on the same page.
Ideally, everyone's on the same page. And this is what we saw with Taproot with Speedy Trial. So Speedy Trial was a method by which Taproot was pushed forward. And what it basically said is, we're going to give miners a period of time to say, yes, we support Taproot, or no, we don't. And if a certain threshold of miners is reached, I believe it was 90%, then a signaling period would end, and then it would enter an activation period where the miners would upgrade their nodes to Taproot, and they would also support blocks that were Taproot enabled. So all that being said, people looked at this as a miner activated soft fork. It was really a way to coordinate with the miners to make sure that they were going to support the upgrade, and so we wouldn't have any risk of a chain split, right?
So this gets into, there is a convention to allow miners and nodes to politely coordinate how and when a soft fork happens. And this gets into what's called the BIPs process, the Bitcoin Improvement Proposal process, which changes how Bitcoin core nodes primarily treat their interpretation of an enforcement of Bitcoin. And these BIPs 8 and 9, say the miners can signal this way, and there may be some time component to it, and the nodes can look at the particular mechanisms that the miners are signaling with, and it allows everybody to kind of say, okay, we're all going to do it. We're all going to soft fork this time, and we're going to do this kind of soft fork. This is the convention. I use this term again, convention, and the polite way to do it. And but it is I don't know if it's the right way to do it. There is a view that says, by defining a way to activate or to change Bitcoin creates a very straightforward way to attack Bitcoin. And so this is one of the core, I would say it's one of the core nuances about the current discussion of how these soft forks are activated. So,
right. Can we address this question from Jay really quickly? Because I think this is important. So the idea here, Jay, is that...
read it for the audience, by the way.
So how do economic nodes activate a soft fork without a miner to hash and produce a block with the different quote, end quote, transactions? So the idea here is, and this gets into the kind of power politics of nodes versus miners, the whole one node, one vote thing. When you're running a node, you are signaling to the rest of the network, this is the rule set that I abide by and I believe to be the valid Bitcoin, right? So the rule set that I'm following is for the chain that I believe to be the longest and the valid chain that represents what I believe to be Bitcoin, or what is Bitcoin. So if a node rejects the blocks that a miner produces because it does not follow those rules, then those blocks do not get propagated to all of the nodes in that node's network. So if a node says, Charlie, let's say I'm running a node, Charlie produces a block that I find invalid, I do not broadcast that block because it's not a part of the chain that I follow. Then all the nodes in my network are only getting the blocks that I propagate through my node. So this was a big part of the whole Node 2x and the user activated soft fork. Is basically you had a bunch of node runners who said, we are only running SegWit, and SegWit 2x is dead to us and is not valid. So if you miners produce SegWit 2x blocks, you will be in the minority because we will not run it. And so the user activated soft fork actually never ended up happening because for SegWit specifically, because the node operators scared the miners and they're like, okay, well, we're going to adopt SegWit. They tried to do SegWit 2x and then that fell through, ended up creating a minority chain that never went anywhere. But so this is all kind of in the weeds, but just to put a pin in it, Charlie, because I know you have something to say here.
Yeah.
I can see you chomping at the bit. The idea here is that there's an economic incentive for the miners to follow what the node operators are doing. Otherwise, the blocks they produce are economically worthless. And this gets into another point that I'm going to make after I let Charlie jump in here, which is the unfortunate truth is the real party that decides Bitcoin consensus is actually the market and at the end of the day. But we'll get into that in a second.
Yeah, I mean, I'll say that I'll reference Post Capone again from my most recent episode of Bitcoin Season 2. He did not say this on this podcast, but he uses this example a lot because you say these nodes say we're not going to validate this chain, and Post says, okay, well, what if I go rent 10,000 nodes on AWS servers and vote in favor of this? And this is where this idea of economic activity and the market like really comes into play, because these no SegWit 2x nodes, what they're really doing with their node is signaling probably something about, I have this kind of economic influence and I indicate that I don't want to do this. And so this is where there is a relationship. I think about almost like the scorpion and the frog crossing the river between the miners and the nodes. And maybe the frog is sitting on top of the scorpion like the nodes, but the scorpion cannot cross the river without, or the frog cannot cross the river without the scorpion. I may have gotten
I think you mixed that up there.
the animals wrong. Yeah, that's what I did.
Scorpion
I got the
is
animals
on
wrong.
frog.
Whatever,
Yeah.
whatever the fuck. Scorpions don't swim. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
This is so. It is a relationship between these. My personal opinion is that I think the node operators got a little bit too prideful and a little bit too drunk with power after they perceived the SegWit no SegWit 2x event after the block size war. And I think this is a little bit too dominant in the conversation.
So I think to that point, God, there's some. This is like,
Yeah. Oh God, we're gonna get.
We need like a
We need
12-hour podcast.
we gotta self-impose 3 more minutes of talking about.
I'm sorry.
5 more minutes.
I'm overruling that, at least
Okay.
10, because there's so many more things we need to say. We need like a Dan Carlin's like hardcore history about the block size wars.
Dan Carlin's hard fork history.
So to kind of just circle back to what Charlie is saying there, 2 things to talk about. First, why the market ultimately decides, and number 2, about like why the cantankerous node operator argument kind of stonewalls discussion for upgrades and potentially risked us ossifying Bitcoin too early. But Reindale pointed this out, kind of concurrent with me saying about the point about the market here. The reason why the nodes can have any leverage over miners is ultimately based on whether or not the coins the miners are producing are worth any value, right? So at the end of the day, the risk with all of this of creating a fork and having another blockchain with its own set of rules and own coins, the only reason why one would be worth more than the other is, what is the market willing to pay? Great test run for this was when Bcash forked off of Bitcoin in 2017. You had a run up in the price of Bcash, and there was this whole talk about the flippening and all of this stuff because people were wondering if Bitcoin Cash was going to become the more valuable coin. It didn't end up that way, but that's kind of a test run of this scenario of ultimately the market has the final decision in a lot of regards for which history and which blockchain and which Bitcoin ends up becoming the dominant one, right? And this is super important with regards to the current state of custody and the current state of the Bitcoin ETFs. You could have a point in time where the majority of Bitcoin is held by institutions, BlackRock, Van Eck, all of these ETF operators. And no matter what you say as a node operator, no matter what the miners say, they might have the final say over what Bitcoin is the real Bitcoin, because they're holding all of the coins, and they're going to say, oh, that change that you're trying to push through, we don't agree with that. And we have the majority of coins in custody that exist on the blockchain. So you know what? We have the market weight in our favor, and we're going to reject your proposals and refuse to upgrade.
Yeah, that's right, MicroStrategy simps. Michael Saylor may have only made like 20 different transactions on chain for his 20 different gigabytes. And he may never even run a node on one of his 8 different yachts, even though Lord knows he can afford to. But the thing is he represents billions of dollars in economic decision making. So that dude can now outvote you, even though he probably doesn't even run a node. He gets Coinbase to run his node for him. And so, like, this is the thing, y'all. Like, I'm fine kind of going out and putting myself out there and saying, as I love corporations buying Bitcoin as much as everybody else does. I love to see it. They're capitulating. But, like, man, y'all, like, do we really want these big, powerful, temporarily aligned with Bitcoin number go up guys really to have this much weight? And this is kind of where a lot of the discussion about Bitcoin soft forks in the future are centered around is, you know, how much should you be able to do with Bitcoin? Do you just want Sailor MicroStrategy to own it and for it to go to 10 million, or do you want it to actually to be an interesting freedom network? So
100%. And you really have to kind of recap. You have kind of like a trifold tug of war going on. You have the market, you have the node operators, and then you have the miners. And we're quickly approaching a future where those three need to be in sync, or else we're going to have contention over an upgrade, right? And so this is actually a favor for being maybe a little more liberal with upgrades for this kind of period that we have right now before Bitcoin really gets adopted. Because if you really want to push things forward and not have crazy ossification, then you really might want to just
meaning like we're not going to change anymore.
Yeah, thank you.
We're
Ossification
kind of
being much, like a bone ossifying, the idea that you are going to have a chain that is no longer capable of being changed, or no one really wants to change it. And I really want to highlight this point just one more time. If you have no one to buy your coins, if you have no one to buy the coins of the chain that you believe is the longest chain and believe is the most valid chain, then those coins aren't worth anything. Look at Bcash, look at Bitcoin SV.
Look at all your runes shitters. That's basically what you're just trapped.
Putting it into DJ.
It doesn't matter if you got $1 billion of like Feihu if no one's buying it. So yeah.
Yep. So
maybe this might be a good way for us to transition into like, okay, so this is this kind of public discussion, and it typically requires some developers, the more technical community, to at least define a way for to define like the logic, and there needs to be some kind of like technical implementation of the soft fork at some level. So typically the conversation begins with developers. Now, whether that conversation escapes the weird developer drama sphere is another question. But what we are trying to do, and here comes the shill, next weekend in Boston, we, Blockspace Media, have a conference to discuss and germinate discussion on Bitcoin scaling. We have a range of different people representing different stakeholders. We have some miners, we have Bitcoin developers, we have capital deployers. We want this to be a place where many different ideas are discussed, and for like progress in what feels like an often fraught and contentious conversation. We think that there is hope to drive some of this conversation. So Colin and I are going to kind of breeze through some of the topics we're talking about at the conference, give some little color or takes on this. And if you're listening and you're a degen, a lot of these names will probably not be familiar to you. They don't typically host large Twitter spaces. most of these people outside of the Taproot Wizards do not have an ordinals or inscription collection.
Some of
And
them
they are
might even
people-
hate ordinals and inscriptions. I don't think we have any haters on here though.
We have a lot of people who are agnostic or not fans.
Yeah.
Which I think is a really good place to be. If you're a listener and you find a really, really smart Bitcoin developer who says, I'm not a fan of ordinals or inscriptions, I just think of other things, that's probably somebody you should listen to.
Yeah.
And so we have a lot of those people. I mean, at the top, we have kicking it off, Steve Lee of Chain Code.
No. Spiral.
Spiral, I'm sorry.
Spiral. It's okay.
My bad.
It's
Apologies.
okay.
Steve Lee of Spiral, co-presenting with Ren from Electric Capital, just talking about what Colin and I have already hashed out, which is who are the stakeholders in Bitcoin consensus. They put together a whole like report on this.
To give you an idea, this document's like 30 pages, maybe more. I mean, they sent it to us. It looks really good. I've only skimmed it. I haven't gone through the whole thing, but you could write a book on this, right? And I think this is going to be perhaps. I think this is great to have as the first talk. So if you're coming, please make sure you're there for 9 a.m. because this is going to set the stage for everything else we talk about. Like, I really think that without this as a topic, none of the other talks, at least the gravity of them, matter as much, in my opinion, though, because actually getting an idea or presenting an idea of how consensus actually works, because consensus doesn't actually exist in Bitcoin. It's very loose. It's more of like the code reinforces consensus, but consensus on changes doesn't really exist.
Yeah. So that's a really good one. Those are two powerhouses, well-known names who represent very important entities in the Bitcoin and broader crypto ecosystem. So then we break out into a speaker track and a workshop track. On the speaker side, we have Portland Hoddle. We have given him the title of his talk, which he may change, but it's Do We Need a Soft Fork? And it's not him. I don't think it's going to be him arguing for a soft fork. If you want to listen to what his opinions are, I did an interview with him several months ago on Bitcoin Season 2, towards the end of that episode, where he says he's kind of agnostic and reluctant to soft fork. He gives a good case for saying there does not appear to be an urgent need from the way Bitcoin currently works. So he's a very good, like, neutral perspective on this. And remember, like, people's opinions change over time and they grow and they develop. So I don't know exactly where he's going to land.
Right.
But the thing is, like, he will probably treat this topic very well.
Yeah, he'll be a good one. And to your point about things changing, we've seen opinions change rapidly about OpCat, right?
Yeah.
So who knows what it'll be, but I think it is good to have kind of the steel man against hasting an upgrade, right?
Yeah.
Another good one, a really good Covenants Dependent Layer 2 review by Peter Todd, a prolific Bitcoin developer. I'd say one of the stalwarts. This is going to be a great topic just because I think a lot of Bitcoiners are looking at OpCat and CTV, and there's not any clear indication to them why these things are necessary or what they're even going to do to improve Bitcoin for them. I think this is especially true with regards to Taproot getting activated, and people are like, well, besides, better multi-sig setups, what is this even doing for us at this point, right?
Yeah. And then over the workshop, we have Brandon Roberts of Starkware doing Shinigami, which is a Stark-proof verifier scheme that he's invented. This is basically for you super nerds out there. You already know what this is, and you're probably going to go listen to this. If you don't know what it is, maybe Google those terms and find them on Twitter and try to wrap your head around it. We've got Enduro from Mike Casey, who is with Marathon on the Enduro platform side. They have an interesting merge mining sidechain idea, and and he's just kind of explain this because it's pretty important that we have Bitcoin miner participation. And Mike Casey represents, he's one of the high up technical guys at one of the largest Bitcoin miners. They have a really interesting take. They're a pretty, I would say, proactive US-based Bitcoin mining company. Then we have Jeremy Rubin.
The return of the prodigal son.
The return. I would say he was just the good son who was
Yeah, he's not prodigal.
not
He's
prodigal.
just the return of the, you know, perhaps the prolific son,
Yeah,
author of CTV, and wrongfully maligned.
yeah.
Jeremy Rubin.
If you weren't aware, like the drama that Colin and I talk about, like Jeremy Rubin is a good recent example of someone who came up with who's a really, really smart, really respected, and then because of certain ways he did things which were perceived negatively, was treated pretty harshly.
Can I go
We
on
are
a rant about this for a second,
sure. I
please?
mean, we
I
are
know
proud to have Jeremy Rubin. We want
we're
Jeremy Rubin
happy
to
to
be
have
front and
him.
center because like this guy has pretty selflessly and humbly, I think, try to propose his ideas for Bitcoin. So go
Yeah,
for it.
so Jeremy kind of bursted onto the stage. He's been a developer. I don't want to say he bursted onto the stage, right? He'd
They
always
founded
been
like the
active.
MIT Bitcoin Club like a decade ago.
Yeah, right. He's always been active, but I think what really slingshotted him into prominence was CTV. And he proposed this back in 2021, 2022. Early 2022 is when it really picked up steam, I believe. I could be wrong about my timeline there, but I remember I wrote a kind of technical breakdown for CoinDesk back in the day around March or April in 2022. And he was pushing for CTV. Was the kind of the first covenant proposal in this most recent round that really made the rounds and kind of kickstarted the technical discussion and software discussion for covenants on Bitcoin, I would argue.
Yeah.
And what he ended up doing was he ended up going around and shopping this and saying, "What do you guys think of this? Is this something that we would want to do? Maybe this could be Bitcoin's next soft fork."
Any
And
reasonable person would.
sorry?
Like any reasonable person would.
Like any developer would, but where he fucked up, I think, and I do think it was reading the room wrong. You got to be diplomatic, and this is something that I think devs have a problem with. Is sometimes they don't realize the diplomacy and politics that go into pushing or advocating for and lobbying for some of these changes. Is he made a website explaining CTV, how it works, how it benefits Bitcoin, what you could use it for, and then he included an activation section to his website. And he started going around to miners and he started asking them, would you support this? And that really turned people off because they saw this as Jeremy currying favors with the miners. And that was the criticism, I think, against that approach. I think the most charitable way to view it and the way that I view it is kind of what we said at the beginning. He wanted to make sure that if this were actually going to make it to the table in a BIP form for activation, that miners weren't just going to stonewall it and refuse to support it. Because if you have the miners on your side, like we saw with Speedy Trial, it just greases the wheels, things really easier. Ultimately, the reason why I think CTV was scrapped and never considered with a lot of people in the Bitcoin community is kind of what you talked about earlier, Charlie, about the haughtiness of the node operator argument. People did not like Speedy Trial. They did not like how Taproot was activated, and they had problems with the activation method. Therefore, they looked at CTV and said, we need to fix activation before we consider this. And they thought that it was a kind of, ham-fisted attempt to force an update so quickly after Taproot.
Yeah.
And I think, I've said this a lot, so I'll get off my soapbox. I think it's kind of personally, or not personally, I think it's kind of absurd and a bit of a travesty that OpCat has like leapfrogged CTV. I think they at least need to be discussed in tandem. I think that if we're going to activate one, the other one deserves due consideration. To me, it makes no sense why Jeremy was treated so hostilely, but now everyone's okay with it. I think if he had waited a year or two, we would be having conversations about CTV the same way we are about OpCat. But that's all I'm going to say on it.
I have nothing to add. I think it was just a cultural issue, and Bitcoin culturally was in a bad place. So,
yeah.
skipping
And
forward
to caveat, I'm not anti-OpCat.
yeah,
I'm not anti-OpCat. I would rather have covenants in some form.
yeah. Okay, so then on OpCat, we have at 11 getting through the programming. We had Ethan Heilman with OpCat. He is one of the co-authors of OpCat. I don't know what he's going to talk about, but like it's the BIP. It's the one everybody's talking about. He's the guy. He's half of the guys, and he's going to talk about it. And over on the workshop stage, we got Trey Del Bonus. I don't know how you say his name, but he's with Alpin Labs, and he's going to be talking about some of the interesting. I think he may be able to demo some cool stuff. Yeah. Then we got Alex B with Arc Labs talking about Arc. I'm not sure if he's going to talk about their implementation of Arc or Arc in general. Probably both. I had Alex again on my podcast recently. These are not accidental. We believe that, you know, it's not just about watching the presentation, but rather all the context leading up to this. Then we have Brandon Black, often known as Reardon Code on Twitter. One of my favorite people in the software discussion, talking about collaborative harm reduction. And I don't actually know what this means, but I think this probably relates to, if I can imagine, it probably relates to both the social angle and the technical angle of custodying Bitcoin. What do you think it's going to be about?
I have no idea. I mean, Brandon is one of the, if not the architect behind L-Enhance, right?
Yeah. Yeah, he's the writer. He's the main guy between L-Enhance, the main proponent.
Which was another potential soft fork. You know, I feel like there have been 3 that were in the sights of a bunch of different developers, and seems like OpCat currently has the momentum or the most sites on it. I have no idea what collaborative harm reduction is going to be about. Maybe this is something to do with UTXO sharing, which is like one of the benefits of these covenants. I don't know.
Yeah, the thing is, like, covenants, I mean, I'm biased towards them. As Post says, they're the most directionally correct ideas for soft forks. And if you like, I mean, if you're just normal old Bitcoiner asking, why do we have to change things? Have you ever lost Bitcoin? Do you know someone who has lost Bitcoin because of key mismanagement or something to do with self-custody? Covenants totally change the game. So, you know, you can make the mechanics of self-custodying so much better. Think of your mom trying to, like, secure a private key.
Right. Or
Like,
think about, you know, you're sweating bullets when you go on a vacation and your tiny little hardware wallet is sitting at home waiting to be molested by some masked marauder in the
by
night.
some maid, the
By
rogue maid, or
by
whatever the
some
term is.
yeah, some burglar coming in, and he's Bitcoin savvy. But that's one of the other cool things, you know, you mentioned, you know, coin recovery and stuff, but also just the idea that you can set conditions that were basically prevent theft if somebody gets your private keys.
Yeah.
And, you know,
So
covenants just seem like an obvious win to me. I think it's just whether or not people are going to get their heads out of their asses to be okay
yeah,
with activation.
yeah.
That's all it comes down to. People
Heads out of
never seem to
asses.
have legitimate arguments against these proposals. It's against how to activate them.
There's always a legitimate argument, but it's I right now. Okay. Anyway, next thing. We got Misha Komarov with Alec in it doing Bitcoin Pipes, which is an interesting no fork covenant emulation scheme. Again, I did an interview with him on Bitcoin Season 2. We have Rindell with the Wizards, Dev Tooling Post Covenants. This is a working title. We'll let him probably maybe adjust this, but I think it's really interesting. Like, how do you as a developer work with a covenant? How do you build stuff with covenants?
So if you are a developer in the Bitcoin ecosystem, this will be a great talk for you. If you are a casual user, might be a little bit too much, but it'll be interesting nonetheless.
Conference. We have Alex B again on the workshop side in the chat saying Arc mainnet. That would be really cool. I did test out a Arc on testnet. I got to test out Arc Labs' Arc on testnet in Amsterdam. It was very, very cool, seamless onboarding.
Alex, if you are showing mainnet or y'all are launching mainnet during Op Next, help us break some news, bud.
Yeah.
But
then we got
Alex, looking forward to the presentation for sure.
Yeah. Then we got Paul Stort with CUSF. This is core untouched soft fork. It gets into the whole thing that we talked at the first part of the episode about how does a soft fork even work. And this is Paul's proposal for a different way, which does not involve the conventional process or the Bitcoin Core client. So Paul Stork is doing a demo workshop on that. Then at lunch, over lunch, we have BitScript doing kind of an intro to Bitcoin script. If you're not a developer, this might be great. If you like know how to use Bitcoin wallets and you want to like know how all that shit works under the hood, BitScript is great. Then we have Pete Rizzo talking about the first soft fork ever, the battle for P2SH. Then Taj Dryja scaling L1 Bitcoin. I don't know what this is going to be about, but you might
Taz are
know.
going to drop Lightning Network 2.0. Taj Dryja, famously one of the co-founders or co-designers, I should say, of the Lightning Network. Very interesting to see what he has to say.
Yeah. Yeah, so really happy to have Taj there. He's very notable for the Lightning, and he's just a smart guy all around. We've got Hunter Beast, quantum proofing Bitcoin. This will be a fun one. Hunter wrote a BIP, I think, or was it PR? Whatever. He wrote a BIP, which I don't think has received a number for a way you could quantum proof Bitcoin. So that could be a pretty fun, lighthearted one, I think.
Lighthearted. Quantum computing is scary as shit, dude.
Yeah, but it's a future problem.
Yeah, future problem that could manifest much more quickly, right?
Okay, this is another Bitcoin Season 2 episode. Write that one down.
Calling doom pills, everyone. I don't
We're
know
gonna get
shit.
Hunter on Bitcoin Season 2 to talk about
I don't
it.
know shit about quantum
Me
computing. I mean,
neither.
people working on quantum computing hardly know shit about quantum computing. So
Exactly. Then we got Robert Miller, Ethereum MEV Mind Maze.
Narrative
shit, we got leaked.
violation.
Oh no.
Narrative violation.
No, narrative violation.
We're gonna get banned.
Oh
no,
no.
but this will be fun though, because MEV is very nascent on Bitcoin currently with like ordinal sniping and stuff. Charlie's written some great newsletters about this. Highly recommend you check out the Blockspace newsletter to see some of his takes here, but could be something, as Post Capone said in that most recent podcast, that is inevitable for Bitcoin. Whether or not it will manifest in the same way that Ethereum has it, I have my doubts, because really you need on-chain order books, I think, for that to become a thing. But going to be a great conversation about some of the pitfalls of it.
Yeah, and Robert Miller, yes, even though he's spent most of his time on that dirty, sacrosanct blockchain called Ethereum, he is very smart and probably the best person to talk about this. Then we've got Sean Ryan talking about Op Vault for custodians. You know, the whole like, how does your mom use Bitcoin thing? Well, Op Vault is like about as straightforward as it is. Like, how do you take the rough edges around putting your Bitcoin somewhere so you can give it to your mom? And that's there's probably other things. So then we have another one of our kind of like, I don't want to say like headliner, but one of our big gets, because he's kind of he's around a lot of this, which is Rusty Russell of Blockstream, about with a presentation on the Great Script Restoration. There's been some talk about this, but not as much in the past few months. Great Script Restoration is like, okay, Satoshi originally included all this stuff in Bitcoin, which was pretty soon after like turned off. Was it turned off temporarily? Is this something we should bring back? And his kind of big message is we should start turning these things back on, or should restore this type of expressive Bitcoin script. So that'll be a really good one. Then we got Waking Chen with L2 Iterative doing Starks and Other Shenanigans. This is a title I just kind of gave him because I thought it was pretty fun. And he's always like, if there's ever some like interesting Stark or like proof thing, he's like, in the past 6 months, he's been like the guy to like get an idea out there or implement it first. And so we gotta have Waking at the conference. And then the two big ones, I think these are the two. We're doing workshops all day, and then we got two spicy panels. Colin, you wanna
activation and other scary words, because they are scary words. I'm really looking forward to this panel because it kind of gets to the heart of what we've been saying here. I just keep coming back to this. I feel like most of the criticisms against activation or upgrading to a new soft fork, there's the obvious one where it's like you're adding more complexity to Bitcoin, and that adds for additional attack vectors that maybe are underexplored, all that stuff. Fair criticisms to a point. I think you get to a certain level of understanding of some of these upgrades, though, or at least the developers do, to where they can do a good job of foreseeing secondary effects, or at least the more conversations you have about it, the more you realize what will and won't change and what vulnerabilities there might be. But really, I just keep coming back to a lot of what stonewalls some of these discussions is people really have like this, almost atavistic fear of upgrading because of the activation process. And there's this kind of collective memory of SegWit and No2x that makes people shudder at the idea of the big bad miners controlling consensus and all these other things. So I think this will be a great this is a great conversation to have to close out the evening. I mean, there's one after it, but you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Towards the end, because it will really contextualize, I think, a lot of what it will take to get something across the finish line. Because you have to convince people not only that the soft fork is worth it, you have to convince them that it's worth it to go through the risk of a chain split, right?
Yeah. And we have quite a panel there. These are very big names and very influential
Huge names. Jay Benedict of Foundry. He is one of the lead engineers at Foundry. Rusty Russell, obviously, and Peter Todd, great developers, very prolific, and Pete Rizzo, one of the premier Bitcoin journalists, founder, one of the co-founders at CoinDesk. Now he's doing a fantastic Bitcoin history newsletter that I recommend everyone check out.
Yeah. And then another panel, the last one is called Just Soft Fork or Maybe Not. Aren't you hosting this one, Colin?
Will kicked me off, apparently. I think I might still be. Maybe he thinks it's going to be too crowded. I think I will be moderating this, though. So, yeah, I should be moderating this. And this will be the perfect capstone to the event because we're not going to reach consensus at OpNext as much as we would love to think that we are.
As well, we don't want to get too high and mighty. We don't
want to get too. We are but humble event hosts.
We would like conversations to happen which are looked back at as formative.
Yeah, 100%. And so for this one, just a kind of good way to wrap up the event and talk about, we going to get a soft fork soon, or are we going to keep kicking the can down the road? Right.
Yeah. Be like, okay, guys, listen to all these presentations, all these smart people, we're all in the same room. How are
Let's
the vibes?
talk about it. Yeah. And that's kind of the hope for this conference, right? We have no delusions about necessarily moving the needle and everyone reaching consensus in one room at the Fidelity Center in one day in Boston. But we do hope that all of the conversations and presentations that we have will at least enrich everyone's understanding and help them form a better or help them reach a better and more informed opinion as to which soft fork they believe makes the most sense and whether or not they even want one in the near future.
Yeah, and it will be recorded and streamed so you can go back and reference these later. And that's kind of the hope is like, okay, we know that we can't fit 5,000 people in a room in Boston, nor is that probably productive. But if we can get between 1 and 200 people at a small conference and then have that be very high signal, that's probably one of the more useful things to have at this particular time in Bitcoin's journey to global domination, inshallah. So, on that note, Colin, somebody made it this far, 55 minutes into Bitcoin Season 2, Writer's Room. We appreciate you coming. We know it is November 1st, but if you use the promo code October
and opnext.dev,
you can get 30% off your GA ticket. It is not too late. It's Boston in the fall. The weather is going to be Italian kiss glorious, very, very Boston-y, I assume. I've never been.
And a beautiful city. You never been to Boston?
No, I've been everywhere else, man. But yeah.
Beautiful city. If you've never been to Boston, you should come, especially for OpNext. It's a great city. It's one of, I think, the U.S.'s prettiest cities. It's very historic. A lot of old buildings from the 1700s and early 1800s that are still intact. You can do, I believe it's called the Freedom Trail or whatever. You can walk past the schoolhouse where Benjamin Franklin read the Declaration of Independence, and you can come and listen to some dope technical discussion on Bitcoin. And get some amazing pub food, get some amazing Italian food. There's a Chinatown. You can get some hot pot. Great city. Really can't.
Can I get a hell yeah in the chat? So,
yeah.
On that note, If and we definitely said some things which were probably somewhat misleading about the whole soft fork thing, but that's kind of why we're putting ourselves out there, because we are. I'm okay with getting at least eviscerated a little bit, because that's kind of what this is. This whole idea of rough consensus also means it's rough around the edges, and um, so
It
are a
is rough,
lot of you. Yeah,
and it's just such a complicated topic,
yeah.
right? Like I said, you could write books about soft forks,
And
but I
people
do think the
have.
main takeaway is that it's such a messy process and it's so difficult that you have to take all of these things into consideration from all the stakeholders. And whether or not Bitcoiners want to admit it, we like to say a leaderless movement. It's just fundamentally not true. You have to defer to people who have better technical expertise on a lot of these things than you. Like the majority of Bitcoiners do, right? And I think it's just a matter of making sure that you're staying as informed as feasibly possible for yourself and taking as many arguments into account as you can.
Yeah, my hot take, I mean, the whole thing's been hot takes, is that Bitcoiners really let the side of their brain which actually thinks about Bitcoin really atrophied the past few years. And that's a problem. And that's why it may sound a little technical to talk about all the stuff. It's because you spent the past 5 years doing nothing. You thought you won. You thought you won. You let Michael Saylor buy all the Bitcoin. He's not just speculative attacking the government. He's attacking you, the listener.
There is no second best.
He wants to control Bitcoin, and he won't stop until he collects all of the Bitcoin and takes takes all of yours. I don't know. That's fun. But also, yeah, I don't. We did extend an invitation to Michael Saylor to come to the conference.
Did
But
we?
yeah, I sent him a tweet.
Hey, come up next.
Yeah,
Show
bro,
your bags.
sail your yacht to Op Next. You can come into the Boston Harbor. So, we received no comment from the Michael Saylor campaign.
I do think that the recent earnings call that they did, where they're trying to do $56 billion worth of corporate bonds, or they're trying to raise that much over the next decade or something like that, is kind of indicative of what you're saying. To kind of take the more chair of Bitcoiners have kind of diluted the discussion a little bit. I will say though, just to kind of steelman it, or not steelman it, but to give a more charitable view, I think this is just what happens when a movement catches on to become more mainstream. You can't really expect the same technical level of expertise and quality that we saw in the early days, because the people who gravitated towards Bitcoin first were those who understood why it was so groundbreaking and as a computer science advancement, right? And
Obviously, but
yeah.
I don't see Michael Saylor writing checks to Bitcoin devs. That dude. Maybe we'll do a writer's room on this about how Michael Saylor shot down Bitcoin developer
Well,
funding.
I would love to do a stock show
Ooh.
next week on the MicroStrategy strategy and get kind of like a debate going on people who champion it and people who don't, because yeah, it's just to me, it's moon boy
It's
math,
a socially acceptable shitcoin. Hope you have fun with your little MicroStrategy
Bitcoin and crypto
stock
and anything else you're
portfolio
playing with.
and your little public miners, and